So just a little bit of information about Belarus. Before I left, I chose not to do any research on Belarus or Chernobyl. I didn't want to have any preconceived ideas about the people, the food, whatever the case was. I said, I'm just going to go, kind of like coming to Basel, you know, sight unseen, and you just see how it goes and you manage the best you can. So after I get back, I started to do a lot of research on Belarus and Chernobyl, and just an astounding amount of information out there. So I will not bore you with all the information that I found. But a couple of bits of information I think are interesting. From Basel, it's about 2,200 kilometers, or a 30-hour drive. Now, Andreas can tell you about the 30-hour drive. He and his three cohorts drove to Belarus because it was cheaper to bring their equipment, the carpentry equipment, and drive. But because their car broke down, it turned into a 60-hour event instead of 30.
Oh.
So they became exhausted, and now in 5 days' time, they're going to have to build an entire gym floor. So they were lost in Poland somewhere, and Hetty did some magic. I don't know. She did some magic, and they showed up, and it was just. And we of course struggled in coach. The three of us flew, and it was an awful layover in Prague for a whole hour. So it was pretty bad. The size is about 207,000 square kilometers, or about the size of the state of Kansas. For those of you who are familiar with the U.S. They obtained their independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, but still has very strong ties today for various reasons. They import all of their natural gas from Russia, as well as about half of their oil. So there's definitely a relationship going on there. They export machinery, metalworks, some fuel, and some mineral products to make fertilizer. It is flat as flat can be. I think, if I recall looking up, it was the highest point in all of the country was about 300 kilometers, about 600 feet. It's the highest point in the entire country. So it's like being in Kansas.
Hey, Kansas is flatter than Iowa, I can tell you.
All right, it was flat. And I did see a huge mound at one point. I'm like, what is that? I thought it was a mountain. It was the entire supply of salt for the entire country.
Whoa.
In one place. And there's huge cranes on top of these huge hills, which I thought were hills, were actually salt piles. So as you're eating your very expensive chocolate, I mentioned the cost of over 6,000 rubles for a bag of chocolate. It's 3,000 rubles to the dollar and about 4,000 to the euro. And the dollar and the Swiss franc, well, not anymore, but are about the same. There's a pack of cigarettes over there, not for smoking, but to show you that cost 75 cents, or about 50-cent euro piece.
They're smoking at 10.
Smoking, but the average person in Ritschow, the teachers, make €100 a month, so it's about $130 a month. And during the winter season, the heating is about €80 a month. So if you do the math, although 75 cents is inexpensive for us, it was a bit more expensive for them. One thing I found interesting, that they have a 99% literacy rate there. And the one thing I was very surprised with, I thought they obviously speak Russian and they speak Belarusian. I thought, well, then the next language they would speak English. Not so much. I found out that because of the impact of World War II, their next language is German. So the majority of people we spoke to either speak Russian, Belarusian. I'm going to just say Russian because it encompasses both, and German. So Hetty speaks German and Austrian. She speaks German and English. Andrea speaks German and English. Sheila speaks English, well, Canadian English.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. She speaks English, and she's been here for a very long time, so she speaks German and Swiss German, and I speak English and Spanish. So Spanish did me no good there, and ein bisschen Deutsch. But what was nice is that I heard German all week long. And living in Switzerland, I don't have an opportunity to hear it, so it really got my ear a little bit better. But I was really surprised, and it was really kind of fun to listen to people speak German with a Russian accent. So that was that was pretty neat. That was pretty neat. And then a couple famous people you may or may not know are from Belarus. Chagall, the painter, is from Belarus, and Olga Korbut. For those of you who don't remember or do. In 1972, she was the first Olympic gymnast to score a perfect 10. I remember watching that. And she recalls in '86, when Chernobyl hit, she was living in Minsk, and she could see it which is about 300 kilometers away. I think it would be about 3-hour plus drive. So she could actually see it from Minsk. And in 1991, she was diagnosed with thyroid cancer because of the results of Chernobyl, which is the biggest impacting cancer that they're finding now with the children. So I thought that was pretty impressive. She eventually moved to the U.S. because of the health issues with Chernobyl and for her family. So I thought that was pretty interesting. According to the United Nations, in 1986, the explosion in the reactor of Chernobyl was considered the greatest disaster in history. Now we have the BP spill, and that's probably another issue for another day, but at the time, it was 100 times more radiation was released into the air than both atom bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So 100 times that amount. If you can imagine, today 7 million people are affected by the effects of Chernobyl, and 500,000 Belarus children every day are exposed to some levels of radiation. So unfortunately, if you the bigger map of Belarus, you'll see where Gomel is. We flew into Minsk and drove 3 hours, but with our driver, we did it in about 2. I think the speed limits are just recommendations. So we got, and it's about 3 hours, and that's the region of Gomel. If Chernobyl is right on the border of Belarus, and it is solely for the fact on that day the winds were blowing that way. And it hit 70% of that country, and it was the worst impacted of all the countries that had any effects from Chernobyl whatsoever. So it's pretty impressive. And then I won't bore you with too many more. So one more statistics. I didn't want to go into all this Chernobyl statistics, but one thing that really grabbed me was the life expectancy in the Gomel region, which was the one that was hit the hardest. The life expectancy in 1986 before Chernobyl was 72.6 for a male. 72.6 years. By the year 2000, it was 67.6. And today it's 65 for a male, and about 5 years more for a female. So I don't think there's much more you need to say regarding what's happening there and how it's affecting people. So before we go on and talk a little bit about what we did, I want to talk about the future for Ritschow. Has anyone heard of the organization?